When it comes to good mothers in films, who do you think of? Maybe Sarah Connor from the Terminator series, Ripley from Aliens, or even Kate McAllister from Home Alone. Well, what about animated films? I think animated film characters are just as important as real-life ones. In our current film age, I think many people would not disagree. Thanks to Pixar and Disney for bringing animated characters to the forefront. Unfortunately, this was not the same in the 80s with the public, since hand-drawn films were seen as kid stuff. That's a shame, since one of the best mother characters came from the 80s animated films. Welcome to Good Character Design, and I'm going to go over a character from The Secret of NIMH, Mrs. Brisby. Before we begin, I want to lay out some ground rules for this video discussing this character. I'm going by the Don Bluth movie made in 1982. Any other sources are ignored and not put in on purpose. I'm not trying to be mean, it's just what I'm covering. With that said, let's start when the first time we see Mrs. Brisby in the film. I believe it's important to witness what the character is first doing in the movie. It doesn't take long for us to see her. From the clip, we know she is worried about her son. Her husband has passed, and she won't take no for an answer. What I mean by take no for an answer is that she'll do anything for her sick child. When she knows Mr. Ages can help, she is very relieved by her voice and smile. Before, she seemed almost in a panic. Mrs. Brisby as a mom is the driving force of the story, since it's the first thing we see of her. After that, we learn of her patience with others and her willingness to risk herself for her son, Timmy. By being outside, she puts herself at risk from the cat named Dragon, and trying to help it grow. It's dangerous for a mouse to be outside when you are the meal for all kinds of creatures. The cat chases them both, but Mrs. Brisby escapes into a windmill where the crow named Jeremy finds her. She learns from Mr. Ages that while Timmy recovers from the medicine he gave her, that her son cannot be moved for 3 weeks and must be kept warm. If his temperature falls, he could die, so he cannot go outside for any reason. Mrs. Brisby says, "That's a long time since moving day is coming." We will go by moving day later in the story. Since Jeremy found her medicine after the cat attack, she trusts him even though he is absent-minded and talks way too much. When she gets home, we meet another character who is like a mom for everyone living in the yard, Auntie Shrew. She is sort of looking after Brisby's kids while she is away. This shows her responsibility for her kids. This definitely lets us look into why she is so patient with others. The Shrew out loud tells everyone about how she suffers so, which can grind on people. Also, Mrs. Brisby has 4 kids before her husband died, probably learning to take things as they come from dealing with these kinds of characters all the time. The next day, the farmer starts his tractor. This is a bad thing. Why? Because this has to do with moving day. It seems every year the animals of the yard need to move out, because Father McGivens makes a garden. By doing this with a plow, he destroys the homes of the animals. Because her children were in danger, Mrs. Brisby acts without thinking and tries to stop the tractor. Mrs. Shrew saves the day in 2 ways, warning everyone and by disabling the tractor. This proves why Mrs. Brisby trusts her so much. After the ordeal, Mrs. Brisby is found in distress and must be shaken out of it. After all is done, they know disabling the tractor is just a temporary measure. It will be repaired before the 3 weeks are up before they can move Timmy. Mrs. Brisby is running out of options. Mrs. Shrew mentions the great owl. The owl seems to be this all-knowing bird, so if anyone knows how to move Timmy without killing him, it would be the great owl. So with Jeremy's help, she goes to the great owl at a very high risk of not just falling, but from the owl itself. She is told 3 things by the owl that are important. 1. Her husband's name carries great weight in the yard. 2. She must go to the rats in the rosebush. Finally, 3. To trust in the stone. Mrs. Brisby doesn't understand, but without any other choice, she trusts what the owl said. It's also important to note that this is the first time she hears her husband's name is important to others. So this information, she prepares to go to the rosebush near the farmer's house. Again, Mrs. Brisby leaves her well kids to make sure that her one ill kid will not die. This is close to the parable of the lost sheep from the Bible. What is a parable? It's a lesson or story that can teach you a moral. The lost sheep parable is, in short, you should rescue one lost sheep if it strays at any cost. This is what she is doing, as she takes all the risks, and no matter how afraid she is, it's all for her son, Timmy. Mrs. Brisby this time leaves her kids in the care of Jeremy the Crow. He does keep their attention, much like a jungle gym. She probably trusts him with the kids after flying her to the owl and recovering her medicine. When she walks into the rose bush, Mrs. Brisby is surprised by the lights and machinery. A mix in fear and wonder washes over her. This soon turns into running for her life as she encounters her first rat in this new place. Mrs. Brisby is led through this place by Mr. Aegis. This makes her feel a lot better, as the clip showed. This does not seem to last long as they are under attack. Again. This time, though, it was a joke, at Mr. Aegis' expense, as we meet another character, a rat named Justin. The place they come to seems to be in an uproar about something. The location resembles a medieval throne room, but it seemed they use it like an agora, a place for public debate. There seem to be two factions clashing, one about moving on the rosebush and stop stealing electricity, and the other just wants to stay and hold out. When Mrs. Brisby enters the room, she gets to address her concerns. Because she is a stranger, Mrs. Brisby needs the representation of Mr. Aegis and Justin. However, still Mr. Brisby holds more weight in this place than these fully alive representatives trying to talk for her. I think it's safe to say Mrs. Brisby is not using her husband's name to gain an advantage, but she doesn't mind if the name is used to further her goals. She is horrified when all of a sudden everyone in the room say, "We have our own problems." This is her son they are talking about. This is her thought process while they say no. It's written all over her face. When the dark-looking rat, Jenner, wants to help, even Mrs. Brisby knows he is up to something. Because Mrs. Brisby needs them, she does not object from being helped. This is something not said by anyone, but is inferred by her actions so far. Then finally, Mrs. Brisby is led to who the great owl said to meet, Nicodemus. We get a lot of insight on how Mrs. Brisby saw her husband before and after his death. While Mr. Brisby was alive, he kept his wife unaware. I don't think it was out of being cruel, it just seemed to keep this a secret to keep her safe from the truth. Maybe it was because Mr. Brisby felt guilty for all the dead rats that he could not save. Who knows? Still, this is about Mrs. Brisby, and how she feels about it. I can see three emotions from Mrs. Brisby while hearing about her husband. It's wonder, pride, and sadness. The wonder comes from meeting Nicodemus and seeing all these things she really doesn't understand how it works. Like the book opening by itself, for instance. She never asks any questions, she accepts it, almost like it's faith. Pride is from her reading about her husband being a liberator. This is how come his name carries so much weight in the yard, and even more so with the rats. It seems he was a good man before she thought of him as being a good husband. Just with a lot of emotions though, with the highs comes to the lows. Think about her husband, even though it was positive, makes her miss him at this moment. After knowing the basics of Mr. Brisby's secret life, Nicodemus fills her in on maybe why he did keep it a secret. Through a strange device, Mrs. Brisby sees what happened to make the rats in the rosebush so smart. Since this video is on Mrs. Brisby, the explanation of this will be quick. The rats were experimented on by the National Institute for Mental Health, or NIM. These experiments made them smarter and they could comprehend human language. They escaped thanks to Mr. Jonathan Brisby. Without him, they would not be able to live the way they live today. Because he taught Mrs. Brisby how to read, he probably taught her other things not mentioned. After she gains all this new information, Nicodemus gives her a jeweled necklace. It is a red stone surrounded by gold. Nicodemus says that John wanted Mrs. Brisby to have it. She accepts the gift happily and wears it with pride because it's from her husband. When things are said and done, Mrs. Brisby, Nicodemus, and Justin leave on a boat so she could leave the rosebush safely. During the boat ride, they both explain to Mrs. Brisby why they want to move and the need to stay secret. One of the ways they stay secret is to sneak sleeping powder into the cat food's bowl inside the farmer's house. This makes sure Dragon doesn't snoop around for the rats. This is how Mr. Ages broke his leg, too. Because this is all new to her, Mrs. Brisby's curiosity peaks and wants to know more about the plan. From the scene, Mrs. Brisby volunteers to put sleeping powder in Dragon's dish. I think she does this for a couple of reasons. One reason, I think, is because she feels like she needs to repay them. Another reason could be that she wants to do something that her husband did, to honor his memory in some way. I don't think it's to prove she can do it, because her husband could not. That wouldn't fit her character in the film. After that whole scene, she goes to prepare her family, but she runs into Jeremy. Even though she trusts the crow, Mrs. Brisby cannot rely on him now because of his past clumsiness. The rats seem to be on top of things, and she knows them to be smart as human beings, so she convinces Jeremy to stay out of the way. Mrs. Brisby tells him to get all the string he can find, which she knows will take a long time. She lies to him, but it's still not cruel, but she is annoyed by him. She has faith in the rats, and this is too important to mess up. When she is done preparing her kids or getting things in order, Mrs. Brisby meets Justin for her mission to deal with a cat. They go in the hole through the floor and underneath a sideboard, so both of them are not seen. Justin directs her because Mrs. Brisby is new to all this. She is noticeably nervous as she prepares to go out into the open. Justin pushes her to go as she hesitates a bit out of fear. She runs to the food bowl and drops the sleeping powder in. However, on the way back, she is caught by the farmer's son. Fortunately, the son wants to save the mouse because he wants her as a pet. This saves Mrs. Brisby from Dragon, but she is put in a birdcage. She must wait until the humans go to sleep for the night, which is bad for Mrs. Brisby's emotions. Not just from almost being caught, but because she wants to be there for her kids during the move. Another thing is Mrs. Brisby hears from the farmer on the phone later that night. Nim calls and says they will bulldoze or poison the rosebush, killing the rats. With this information, she needs to escape from the cage and tell the rats that Nim is coming. She is invested in survival and the people helping her son. Most of all, Justin, Mr. Ages, and Nicodemus. Unknown to Mrs. Brisby, her children are in the house as it's being moved. Now in a bit of a panic, she thinks of a way out of the birdcage. Since Mr. Brisby taught her how to read, as mentioned, he probably taught her how to problem solve too. The first thing she tries to do is to unlock the cage door, which is locked by a wire twisted around it. She tries to untwist it, but she is too weak and the wire rebounds, cutting her hand. With her hand hurt and bleeding, she puts her hand in the water dish in the cage. While doing so, she realizes that the water leads to the outside. She tries to swim out through the other side, but this doesn't work. It's too narrow. Her panic increases as she runs at the water dish, drop-kicking it, forcing it further back. With one last push of force, the water bowl is pushed out of the cage and falls on the floor. Now she can escape, but is too high up and fall might injure her or even kill. So she grabs a loose string from a scarf that was put in the cage. Mrs. Brisby uses it like a rope and climbs down. Again, she is able to problem solve like a human being, like John did before her. She falls a little too fast down the string and slides into Dragon with much force. Because the cat had sleeping powder, Dragon does not wake up, so she can escape out the same hole she entered from. I forgot to mention, she left her clothes and necklace from Nicodemus at the entrance of the hole. She puts on a red cape and necklace and leaves quickly to see what is happening to her children and tell the rats the horrible news. When Mrs. Brisby shows up to her home, everything seems to be in disarray and destruction. Justin sees her and tells her Nicodemus just died. Even though feeling distressed and sad, she remembers what she heard from the farmer on the phone. She warns the rats that Nim will be coming to destroy their home, so they just move like Nicodemus said. Jenner tries to discourage them from Mrs. Brisby's warnings. It seems like the red stone on the necklace is important. Jenner was willing to die for it. Nicodemus said that when a person of great courage wears the stone, it will glow a bright red and may give the wearer an unknown power. Maybe he heard this and wanted that unknown power for himself. With everything calming down after Jenner's death, Mrs. Brisby feels the weight of Nicodemus passing and the hopeless situation about what to do about Timmy. Since the contraction that was moving her house is broken, Timmy's fate seems slim. When Mrs. Brisby is closer to the house, she knows the rest of her children are in the house as well. She tells her children that they're almost done moving the house. She finally breaks down and cries that she thinks things can't get any worse. Before she knows it, because they think it was a sudden cave-in, the house starts to sink into the mud. When the house starts to sink, her motherly instincts kick in and does everything in her power to save her kids. She knows she can't do it alone, so she calls for Justin for help, which means the other rats will help as well because Justin is captain of the guards. Justin cares about Mrs. Brisby, so therefore cares about her kids. Both Brisby and Justin try everything within their power, but to no avail. The house completely sinks. She wants to save her kids so much she almost drowns, and Justin has to save her. This is reinforced after being rescued by Justin. She tries to go back into the mud to save her kids. Because of the courage in the face of danger, not just from trying to save her children, but from facing peril throughout the film selflessly, the red stone activates. It's not important on how it works, but why this is happening. Mrs. Brisby knows the stone can do something as Nicodemus's voice goes through her head, telling her what the stone could do. She grabs the red stone, but it burns her hands nonetheless. Not having much choice, she tries to hold it again, putting trust in the stone to save her kids. This lets her move her house beyond the reach of the plow. Afterwards, it seems to exhaust her, and she passes out. The energy must come from the stone and the wielder. The film ends with Mrs. Brisby taking care of her children at her new location. She is at peace with the world because her home and Timmy are safe. After everything she has went through, all the trials, her mind is at ease. Whatever trouble may come, she knows from these recent events she can face it. She can overcome it, with the new memory of her husband in her heart and knowing his legacy goes on, not only in the rats of Nim, but in her children as well. Now that the story is concluded, I want to go over her as a character on her own. Throughout the film, Mrs. Brisby changes over time but still has the same characteristics from the start. Like I said from the beginning of the video, when you first see her in the film, Mrs. Brisby is concerned but also humble. When she meets Mr. Ages, she does as she is told to keep her hands to herself, respecting his wishes because he is helping her with her son. When she is in Mr. Ages' lab, Mrs. Brisby looks around and wonders, what is this all about? This is her first look into the technology of NIM without knowing what it is yet. Also because Mr. Ages knew Mr. Brisby, which means he's more willing to help her out with her son's illness. Mrs. Brisby knows there's a cat that hunts down the smaller animals like herself in the farmer's yard. However, she still helps out the crow Jeremy even though he is too noisy, attracting Dragon. Before that, her and Jeremy connect because he wants a girlfriend to make a love nest. Because Mrs. Brisby just lost her husband, she can empathize with him and how he feels. These are her core characteristics before going on her main adventure to save her son. When she takes future actions, her characters shine more as she gets more courageous as the film goes on. Her passion for saving her son is the driving force of her adventure. Whenever she feels a natural fear of the situation, like with seeing the great owl, she reminds herself, it's for her son, Timmy. So when she faces peril throughout the movie, it's not out of character. When she does things not for her son, it's still in her nature. Like with the crow Jeremy, who she befriends. This is the same with the rats of Nim. Mrs. Brisby makes friends with Justin, Mr. Ages, and Nicodemus, therefore cares a little about their mission to move. When she meets Mr. Ages in the rose bush, she is relieved, which is because she knows him. He helped her son with the medicine after all. When Mrs. Brisby meets Justin, she likes the way he looks. But also he is a joker or fun to be with. She learns Justin is a captain of the guard, so he must have a lot of responsibilities. Still, he is cheerful and doesn't let things bother him too much. This lets her make friends with him quickly and builds trust. She likes Nicodemus because he gave her information on her husband and the gift of the red stone necklace. Because of the bright light when opening the door and his ominous presence, Mrs. Brisby is nervous at first. Slowly he welcomes her in and is able to tell her why John is so important, therefore making him important to her. All these characters may have flaws and different ways of thinking, but they also have the same ideals, or morals, to move in order to sustain themselves without stealing from humans. As Nicodemus said, we know too much, meaning self-awareness. The reason I explained why her connection to the rats is important gives more reason why she would want to help them later in the film, and explains why she would go on a mission to drug the cat later. It's not made clear why she tries this in the film. Even Mrs. Brisby says, I must be crazy. The thing is, she would have been there with her kids if not caught by the farmer's son. Still, she put her life in danger just to repay them? I don't think she would have forgotten about her child. Still, it seems my theory of repaying is the most likely. I think doing something her husband did just adds to this idea as well. When everything is done, she knows she can face anything, as I said at the end of the story. She has changed in a way of being braver, but still being modest. After all, even while her home was sinking, she did not blame anyone in anger. Instead, she helped where she could. Her faith and courage in the face of terror leads her to rescue her family from death, using the stone's power. In short, Mrs. Brisby is kind, determined, and courageous. Most of her courage does come from her need to help her son Timmy. This is true and why she is one of the best mother characters in film. Going to the ends of the earth to help her son. Giving her a sense of peace in the end and making her a better, person, so to speak. This video on Mrs. Brisby is a great character in film, is why she is important of good character design. Thank you so much for checking out my video. This is the first video on a character that I believe is good. Please leave comments and let me know what you think. I know I can do better even though my resources are limited. I will see you next time on a video or even in a stream. I have a Twitch. And not like a body spasm. I mean like a Twitch channel. So you can catch me there as Guardian Falco. You can go to Twitch and go to that, whatever. Make sure to be safe out there and take care of yourself.